Good morning. The safety of women and girls in Greater Manchester is a high personal priority for me. Likewise, I want people here to have confidence in their police force, and I take my public duty to hold it to account extremely seriously. This explains why, when a Sky News broadcast in July 2023 featured disturbing accounts and distressing images of 3 women in police custody, I immediately invited the former Victims Commissioner for England and Wales to carry out an independent review. The Deputy Mayor and I asked Dame Vera Baird to report back to us on the experience of people arrested and taken into custody in our city region, with a particular focus on women and girls, on how GMP applies the law in respect of arrests and custody, and on the use of strip searches. Today we publish the Baird Inquiry, and though it makes difficult reading, I am in no doubt whatsoever that it was the right thing to do. What it reveals is a problematic culture and practices that must change. Of the 14 people who spoke to the inquiry, Dame Vera concludes that 7 were unlawfully arrested. As people will be able to read in the personal narratives, many of those people were vulnerable before their arrest as survivors of domestic or sexual abuse and did not pose a risk to the public. And yet, they were put through a demeaning experience of police custody and, in some cases, strip search. In all cases featured, there are examples of extremely poor, indefensible and inhumane treatment. A recurring pattern is what appears to be a lack of even-handedness in the investigation of disputes, where the more vulnerable person is reduced to a state of even greater vulnerability, and those posing a greater risk to public safety do not receive the same attention. As the Deputy Mayor will outline later, we will be accepting all of Dame Vera's recommendations and asking the Chief Constable to consider implementing significant changes with relation to arrest and use of custody. As she makes clear, the level of harm caused by these experiences is huge, and the individuals concerned deserve an apology for what happened. I want to deal directly with the element of the report which will cause most concern to the public: strip searching. There are 2 justifications for carrying out such a search: to secure the welfare of the individual or to look for concealed items. On the former, clothes are removed when individuals are thought to be at risk of causing self-harm, potentially with ripped clothing. Whilst this is ostensibly a decision taken out of consideration for an individual's welfare, Dame Vera's report makes it abundantly clear that it is entirely counterproductive. The welfare of people who experience strip searching is severely damaged by that process, and the traumatising effect of it doesn't necessarily reduce the risk of self-harm in the moment or in the future. In short, a check designed for welfare, in fact, often destroys it. This is why we accept Dame Vera's recommendation on this point. I want to see an end, within 6 months, of the use of strip searching for so-called welfare cases in Greater Manchester, and will ask the Chief Constable to consider moving instead to a practice based on observations. We accept that different considerations arise regarding the use of strip searching for concealed items. We support Dame Vera's recommendations that GMP should ask officers first to consider all alternatives to strip searching and the use of airport screening devices to eradicate degrading strip searching as much as possible. We also support her call for clarity over the level of authorisation needed for searches of this kind. In response, the Deputy Mayor and I will ask the Chief Constable to consider going further and introducing a presumption against strip searching for concealed items. This is not the same as saying they can't happen, but it is about creating a framework which makes it abundantly clear that they are a last resort and not an easy option, where the reason as to why there is no alternative must be clearly set out by the officer concerned and then approved by a senior officer. The people who gave evidence to this inquiry are pretty much unanimous in feeling that strip searches are used as a power trip or to demean them. We are not in a position to determine the extent to which it is true in these cases or otherwise, but we know it is a strongly held view, and it would not be a success to see an end to welfare strip searches only for there to be a big increase in those justified on the grounds of looking for concealed items. At the very least, the lack of adequate record keeping, as exposed by the report, suggests an approach to these matters that currently is far too lax. Any strip searches cause profound and lasting trauma for those subjected to them. We therefore need a new regime which restricts their use only to when they are strictly necessary. Finally, I want to address what this inquiry means for the improvement journey which GMP has been on since 2021. Of course, the cases featured in this report and others like them represent a small percentage of public interactions with GMP. The vast majority are satisfactory or better, and GMP continues to improve across the board. Some of the issues identified by Dame Vera were also highlighted by the last HMIC inspection, and action to address them has been underway for some time, as I am sure the Chief Constable will explain. We continue to support his drive to raise the number of arrests to that which would be expected in a force of this size. What this report reveals is that in the early stages, efforts to improve GMP met with a problematic culture in parts of the organisation which could not be eradicated overnight. We have a shared goal of a force good across most areas and outstanding in some. We are clear that we will not be able to achieve that goal unless we are prepared to hold up a mirror to unacceptable cultures and practices. That is what we have done in asking Dame Vera to produce this report, and it will now enable GMP to go further and deeper on its improvement journey. I want to thank most sincerely the people who came forward to give evidence to this review. You have given a voice to many others who will have gone through similar experiences, and I am confident your courage will bring real change and will mean in future others are less likely to experience what you did. We also thank Dame Vera for her valuable service to Greater Manchester. We will today send the Baird Inquiry to the new Home Secretary and ask her to consider adopting the recommendations as new national policy, as we know the issues uncovered in this report are not confined to Greater Manchester, but prevalent across the country. I would now like to invite Dame Vera to present her inquiry in more detail.
Good morning. In August 2023, this short inquiry was commissioned about strip searching of 3 women at one police station. So welcome to the launch of its report, almost in August 2024. The inquiry changed. We didn't change it. The public of Manchester changed it. As soon as it was announced, other women started to contact the Mayor's office to ask if we would hear about their experiences in custody too. And they were stories that could not be ignored. The terms of reference allowed for more people and, importantly, more issues, because the cases have brought out issues beyond custody into unnecessary and unlawful arrests. And we have looked at complaints and specifically how vulnerable victims of abuse are dealt with when they are in the firing line of Greater Manchester Police. So we agreed to take all these new people on and that we would hear from others, but we gave them just 2 weeks because this was supposed to be a short inquiry, so it was a short window. Importantly, 11 women came to us and 3 men, and we took them all on. I want to thank another 8 women who came to us via women's charities and who had similar complaints to the ones in the inquiry, but they were not prepared to let Greater Manchester Police know who they were when they complained. And because the police have to respond, I was unable to take them on. But I thank them for coming forward. In every case in this inquiry, I took a statement from the complainant and sent them to the police requesting all the information that they had. And the narratives in the report are a mixture of those 2 elements. The police have also had the whole report since February. I wrote it in January and have responded in detail, so none of the facts in the report can be seriously disputed. So the complaints went from 3 women strip searched in one police station to 23, and then back down to 14 in just a couple of weeks because of that problem with anonymity. Far from problems with one police station in Greater Manchester Police, the narratives raised problems at each and every police station in Greater Manchester, except, ironically perhaps, in the light of recent news in Bolton. Longsight was closed much of the time. The scrutiny of where these people were arrested also showed that these poor arrests occurred in almost every division of Greater Manchester Police, except, I think, 2. I'm grateful that Greater Manchester Police signed an information sharing agreement with the Mayor, and with a very few minor exceptions kept to it. Importantly, I do want to thank the participants in this inquiry, many of whom visibly had to dig deep to tell me what had happened to them, not knowing what help I could be. There is a link to all of them to this launch, and I directly therefore thank each and every one of them for coming forward. I am immensely grateful, and I believe that the people of Manchester will be grateful as well. Though many of you have seen the report, but the public haven't. The 14 narratives are followed by chapters looking at the faults disclosed in arrest, custody, strip searching, complaints, and finally, domestic abuse and how it is dealt with when victims appear to be turned sometimes into defendants. The report's online. I'm going to summarise one story and then I'm going to refer briefly to a number of others. Sophie. Sophie is a middle-aged, highly professional school teacher. She was imprisoned, punched and strangled in July of 2022 by her violent partner. She called in the police, who arrested him, bailed him to stay away from her, but he didn't. She thought that by the time she had spoken to me last summer, he had broken his bail 100 times at least. However, the police put a high alert on her home, categorised him as a dangerous, violent DV perpetrator and her as a high-risk victim. That was July. In September, at 3:17 in the morning, there was a huge hammering on Sophie's door. She saw on the street 2 large black vans and a lot of flashing torches. She was terrified. She was arrested, for it was the police, for criminal damage based on the perpetrator saying for the first time after he was arrested for assaulting her that 14 months before she had kicked his wing mirror off his car. She was arrested for 2 other even more minor allegations, but neither of those ever saw the light of day after this arrest. But one of them was that she had bruised his arms on the day when he tried to strangle her. And I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if someone tried to strangle me, I'd probably bruise his arms as well. She was made to undress and dress in her own home with a woman PC present, but she was still searched in the street, not in her house, and she was put into a cage in a riot van. A quick note about arrest. Unlawful unless necessary is the formula to remember. She, of course, offered no threat to anybody. She could have been asked to attend a voluntary interview to discuss this 18-month almost ago wing mirror, if indeed there was anything to investigate. So we looked to the custody sergeant at Cheadle Heath Police Station, who had to decide whether to authorise this detention. He did so. He wrote that her arrest was necessary to protect a vulnerable person. This was the police designated highly violent domestic violence perpetrator from her, protect from her, and he authorised her detention. I imagine that you're as bewildered by now as I am about these decisions, and I imagine that you're as troubled as hearing about them made me. She was detained for 11 hours. She told arresting officers that she was awaiting a hysterectomy. She needed medication to stop menstrual flooding, but she wasn't allowed to take it until a nurse came the next day, and she suffered huge menopausal bleeding. She needed help. She rang the cell bell for an hour before a male officer arrived, went away for another 20 minutes and brought her a sanitary towel, but she needed a change of trousers by then. She had to ask 3 more times for this kind of provision, and each time it was a male police officer. And on one occasion, the way she got attention was because it was the reviewing inspector who comes at a particular time to look at whether she should continue to be detained, and she asked him for further supplies. Now, according to the custody record, Sophie had been allocated a female welfare officer, but that female welfare officer probably was allocated, but she never appeared. She's not on the custody record, and Sophie saw no woman while she was in custody. Greater Manchester Police have said very clearly that they will always designate a female welfare officer, and clearly it needs to be done with greater rigour than was present on that occasion. Sophie told her police interview what I have told you, and she was bailed to stay away from the perpetrator, to avoid a threat to him. Indeed, she was bailed on exactly the same terms as he was bailed on, to keep away from her. The arrest and the detention advanced this inquiry into a wing mirror not one bit. 5 days later, the arresting officer hammered again on her door and offered her a caution, which she refused to take. Because she wouldn't take it, she was charged with criminal damage to a wing mirror in 2021. But happily, her barrister was able to talk to the Crown Prosecution Service, who dropped it because, and I quote the barrister, "It isn't in the public interest to let this man use you and the police to further your power over Sophie." Sophie told me that literally she thought her life was ruined. She will never trust the police again, and neither will her teenage offspring who were there. She has had treatment for PTSD as a consequence of this. She is terrified that they will come again in the dark and take her away and lock her up for 11 hours while she bleeds. She told me she has moved house from the shame of being searched and put into a cage in a riot van outside her front door as if she was a terrorist, and the caution would have shown on a disclosure and barring search. She is a school teacher, as I said. That would almost certainly exclude her from any future teaching job. It is written on the back of the document that the officer presented to her that he will exclude her. And it's even arguable that it would have been an offence for Sophie to apply for another teaching job had she accepted that caution. Happily, she didn't, but it was a serious expectation from the officer, who was very forceful with her about that. There is a High Court case in which a teacher successfully sued police for wrongly arresting him, and that's because the arrest itself showed up on a disclosure and barring check. The expert evidence was that he wouldn't get another teaching job with that there, and his career was ruined. And do officers think of this when they go late at night to arrest somebody for what must have been, in any view, a trivial offence? Listening to Sophie's story, as I was with some women from the Mayor's office, one of them said, "My goodness, I've been very naive." And I think she was saying, I thought the world worked in a more fair way than this. So, a woman traumatised by the man's behaviour in the first place, who is recovering from that but also quite ill, must have felt as if her whole world had tilted sideways. She certainly has told me several times that she bitterly regrets ever reporting this violent man because of what followed. So one looks bewildered, and then the bewilderment actually turns to fury. And you ask yourself, who comes into the police to lock away their brains and stash away their humanity and tick up another arrest? Is that what it's about? Job done? Remember, there are about 6 officers here in large vans going along with this. Who recruits, who trains, and whoever checks that they are exercising their quite enormous powers in a proper way. There is a marked lack of context, which I think you'll see in the next couple of cases. I mean, the next step, of course, is to second what the barrister has said and ask, why are the police aiding and abetting this controlling man to exact the most painful revenge he can inflict on his victim, because she will no longer put up with him. Clearly, all of this raises serious questions about culture. Let me consider much more briefly Maria. In 2023, she came to a Manchester hotel from Yorkshire with her partner for a charity event there. They had a disagreement. He beat her up. She screamed. Someone called the police. The partner fled. The police attended, and they arrested her partner from the family car and left with him. The next morning, Maria had very little money, no credit card, no car keys, no house keys which were in the car, all in his property on arrest. She can't drive home. She can't wait in the car for him. She has no idea where he is or what is happening. She has no contact number for the officer in the case. The victim code requires that every domestic abuse victim should be given a contact for the officer, but that hadn't happened in this case. So at 8 o'clock, she does all she can do and goes to the nearest police station to knock on the door, but there is no front desk at Pendleton Police Station, so she phoned from outside on 101. I listened to the 14 calls that she had to make standing outside Pendleton Police Station between 8 in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon, in which she repeatedly explains that she's a domestic violence victim and that this is her predicament. But though she has to give, her name and address and a date of birth and her ethnic origins and his as well, and a story every time before people will talk, nobody will help. She is told that no one will take her to see him, that no one will look into his property, that her only choice is to wait and see what time he comes out, if indeed he does come out. By the 7th or 8th phone call, she is beginning to swear with frustration, but she always apologises for doing exactly that. But finally, on the 14th phone call, she says to the police, and I paraphrase, "You are all we've got and you won't help me." And she puts a few F words in there as well. And she says, if I didn't have kids, I would drown myself because no one cares what happens to me. I think it was that threat to do her self-damage that brought out from the police station 2 police officers with a note from their sergeant saying, help her, she has been making abusive phone calls to the police but has threatened to kill herself if we don't tell her where her husband is. I should add, that the police were a few feet from her inside Pendleton Police Station for the whole 6 hours when she was trying to get some attention. And out did come 2 officers. Nutshell law on arrest 2. An officer, in order to arrest somebody, has to have personal knowledge or personal understanding to reasonably suspect that a crime has taken place. I say that because the officers who came out only had the little note I've mentioned, that she was threatening herself because the husband, she didn't know where the husband was, and additionally that she'd made abusive calls to the police. That's the only note that there was. There has to be, for malicious communications charge, indecent, grossly offensive, threatening or false communications made deliberately to cause distress. And you can see in that very short note that there is absolutely none of that there. But I tell you all of that because having got her to come into the police station with a view to taking her away to find her husband and recover property, in fact, she is arrested for malicious communications by saying F to the police a few moments ago. The custody officer authorises her detention with no difficulty at all. She is strip searched because as she was grabbed, as she was, by 4 police officers under arrest. She dropped a vape down her trousers, but she managed to kick it out. Nonetheless, she was strip searched on that basis. And she was required to be naked and to open up her vagina and open up her anus so that they could look inside. And then she was interviewed afterwards and told the story I've told you. And she was bailed at 3 o'clock in the morning, as the police were still well aware, with very little money, no card, no keys, in a strange city, and she was propositioned by a number of males passing by in cars. Greater Manchester Police exercising their duty of care to a vulnerable female victim of domestic abuse. That's 2 domestic violence victims in 2 stories who have been turned by the police from being victims into being defendants. Charlotte is slightly different, but not much, and then I'll move to talking about a man. Charlotte has a 15-year-old stepdaughter who's in care, usually placed with her. At this time, which is last March, she was in a children's home, but she absconded. The staff said because a man had called her and said that she was going to be taken by him and he was going to a hotel, he was going to rape her and he was going to make her have sex with a lot of other men for money. People knew who this man was. The girl herself, age 15, rang Charlotte and said, come to this cafe, this is where I am. So she and her husband went. They found Charlotte found the girl at a cafe with the man who she'd absconded from the children's home to escape, who had said he would rape her and take her to hotels for other men. This individual had a child abduction warning notice already against him, issued by Greater Manchester Police, which is a notice saying, we are concerned about your behaviour vis-à-vis this child, and if you see her again, after you get this notice, our concern will inflate. And so he should never have been anywhere near her, and neither should the woman who was with him, who was his girlfriend. Charlotte rang 999 immediately and asked the police, please come and help us rescue our daughter from these people. She went inside to make sure nobody left. In fact, the cafe owner had to lock them all in. The girl pushed her. This is not a surprising reaction from a traumatised child, of course. And the girl said that she pushed her back. She actually held her to stop her from leaving. And the two men, her husband and the man with the corn, had a row, but didn't fight. The police arrived. She is outside by now, away from them, and she tells the story on body-worn video to an officer. Other police watch the cafe's own video, and they see Charlotte pushed by the girl and Charlotte gripping her. So, against the background of child abduction warning notices, rape threats that very day, a 15-year-old girl in care, and desperate parents trying to protect her, the officer who has been talking on the video to Charlotte outside the cafe arrests Charlotte and her husband for fighting in the cafe. They're arrested for affray, and the police intention is to leave the girl with the man who has a corn against him in the cafe with him. Charlotte practically refuses to go with them unless they take the girl as well. And in fact, the police arrest her and take her to the children's home. Again, a custody officer authorises detention, and Charlotte, in a state, urgently needs to go to the lavatory, presses the bell in custody with no response. She has a terrible accident. She has to take her trousers off to clean herself and then shiver in a top and leggings. She also started to have menstrual floods, which are pretty common to women in stress, but she was too shy to ask a man for sanitary protection. She was detained 8 hours. She was interviewed and she told the story for a third time. She told it on the 999. She told it on body-worn video, and she told it yet again. And she was bailed with her husband to stay away from their daughter, bail which had to be reversed the next day because the police themselves in the right department accept that they are the supportive parenting that this girl needs. So it seems to me that what the police chose potentially to do was to criminalise responsible, caring and terrified parents, put a child at risk and give licence to recognise child predators. I think again you can see this utter failure of any context to look at. It almost seems as if people look around and can't see an officer say, oh, there's a push, that's a crime, get rid of that. We've done our job. I hope that's not right, but I can see no other explanation. I mean, it really defies gravity. Let me move to Mark, somebody who people might have seen on TV very recently. All of the people in this inquiry are anonymised, but Mark changed his mind and we started to call him Matthew. So if I call him Matthew, you know it's Mark, very biblical. He's a victim of at least 3 unlawful arrests and at least 2 unlawful strip searches. On the first occasion he's arrested, he wants to complain at the custody desk about a real grievance. He's black and he thinks there's a racist motive behind some police behaviour. In protest, he won't answer questions on the custody record, which include questions about whether you're suicidal or not. The custody sergeant says, "You are completely pissing me off." And he turns away and he comes back with 3 police officers who take Mark down to the cells, clearly telling him he's going to be strip searched because he's visible on the camera taking his own clothes off as he goes to stop them from doing it. This is the strip search the mayor referred to for welfare purposes. If you won't answer the questions about suicide, by default, you're assumed to have a strip search so that no mistake is made about that. Others may see a different motive from welfare in this. So welfare purposes were served in the following way. He was stripped naked. He was given an anti-rip suicide suit, which he refused to wear for obvious dignity reasons. So he was naked under a blanket with the suit. The same custody sergeant accused him of ripping the anti-rip suit and took the suit the blanket, his mattress, all away, so that Matthew was naked in a bare cell and tried to keep warm by throwing hot water on himself, but the custody sergeant turned the water off. A second arrest, the same family dispute. These are all minor. Mark has no charges at any time. He was strip searched and he was naked again, since he would not wear a custody suit. He is in a cell, and the same custody officer sends a policeman to interview Mark. However, it wasn't a policeman. The custody sergeant knew that Mark was naked and wouldn't wear a strip suit, but he sent a woman police officer who has made a statement saying she didn't know that Mark was naked. He's under the blanket. She opens the door, and there he is, standing up, stark naked. She says, put the suit on. He refuses. She then walks him naked down the cell corridor, and I watched that video, and then I watched the video on the opposite side of the door he was going through, which is the semi-public custody area. And he was walked naked into that semi-public area, and that is quite evident because when you see the video on that side of the door, you can see everybody going shocked at what they are looking at. And then 3 large officers take him back again. It is hard to see any welfare provision in either of those strip searches, and I think that I'd like to echo what the Mayor said, which is that there is damage of an enormous kind to welfare, let alone to trust, by dealing with strip searching as a weapon of control, which I fear is the conclusion that we are driven to. Both the other men, we had 3 men in this inquiry, were strip searched for welfare reasons, and both of them were hurt. All of the people in this inquiry who were strip searched voiced and do in the report that it was deliberately done to humiliate them, to suborn them, or to show them who was the boss. So recommendations must follow from this, and they're pretty practical and even pedestrian. The first is that we must stop strip searching people for welfare purposes entirely, to avoid people getting strip searched for pissing off a custody officer and having shocking pranks played against them when they've been strip searched. Truly, the worst thing you could do to somebody who's really suicidal would be to forcibly take their clothes off. And that is absolutely what they should do. Nobody, I think, believes that anyone involved in this was really suicidal. Officers who helped me get information during this inquiry told me about a number of ways in which people could do themselves damage in a cell, whether they got clothes on or not. So it's not even a good way of saving people from hurting themselves. College of Policing guidance is to stop doing this and instead to have observations, which means in shifts they're watched on the CCTV, which covers almost every cell in most custody suites now. In shifts, they're only allowed to be there for 24 hours normally, and it's an incentive to get them out more quickly. They should also, of course, if there's a suspicion that they're suicidal at all, be brought Samaritan-type help straight away. You know, the National Police Chiefs Council has a principle that says that anybody who comes into custody should go out in a better state than they came in. So this requirement should be discharged as speedily as possible. The problem with this, given the underlying notion about bullying underpinning it, is there is another way in which you can strip search somebody, as the Mayor has said, to look for something they have. And so obviously the worry is that a custody sergeant easily pissed off will just say, oh, I thought he had a knife instead, and strip search nonetheless. Hence the very, very careful matrix of control that the Mayor has agreed should be applied to strip searching for articles. They can't be excluded completely because sometimes it is essential. However, there should be a very, very carefully graded airport equipment use, frisk over the top. Ask the person, for goodness sake, Has he got anything with him? He might just give it to you. And only as a very, very last resort, strip search. Those are my strongest recommendations. My understanding is the College of Policing are wholly behind, particularly the first, and that the new Home Secretary is too. Just going back to arrest for a minute, most of these people you've heard about, and most of them in the report, should never have been arrested to be put into a strip search or left without sanitary or toilet provision. Arrest is only lawful if it's necessary and if no less intrusive action would achieve the same outcomes. These are all low-level arrests for criminality. Only one person, I think, has been convicted of possessing 2 rocks of cocaine for apparent personal use, and Maria still has her malicious communications prosecution to come up. But that is it. 7 of these arrests were unlawful. No crime committed at all, like the malicious communications one, or no necessity to use it. And we got independent legal advice to make sure that I was taking a balanced view. These are few arrests, and I acknowledge that the whole inquiry is about few people. But the behaviour has come from every police station in Greater Manchester Police, with a random sample of 14 people simply coming out of the woodwork to tell us about them. They have also, if you add to that arrest behaviour, the behaviour of the custody officers that I've described, a sense of power soaking through people who won't be questioned, who are never checked, who looks at whether an arrest is an assault or a legal arrest. Who looks at it? There is no way of looking at it. You could make a complaint if you thought it wasn't lawful. The complaint system is not really respected enormously. And of course, things get worse when you go through those doors into custody, when there are only police and more police, and the only record that's kept of what happened is done by those. So these arrests that have happened point to the very real possibility that this kind of wrongful arrest, this kind of jerk reaction, that's an offence, I'm off to arrest, may be far more widespread than simply the 14 here. Custody officers have a duty to the welfare of the arrestee, and detention has got to be necessary. You've seen some of the scrutiny applied to arrest. Let me just tell you very quickly about Evelyn, who was arrested, and in her pyjamas in the custody office, her 2 female officers were asked by the custody sergeant, and what's the reason for the arrest? And I can see on the video, as you would, the 2 sort of look at one another and they go, to help the prompt investigation of a crime? And the custody sergeant writes it down. This is not any kind of check. It is colluding, isn't it, in ticking the custody admission box. Custody officers are supposed to consider the welfare of arrestees, and you've seen some negligence, to put it mildly, about that. But Diana, another person in this, physically disabled and suffering from clinical depression, arrested really just to get her out of the house while the police searched it, tells the custody officer that she feels she'll be suicidal if she's put into a cell. And he says, well, you'll not be doing that because we put you in handcuffs and leg irons on the floor if you show the slightest sign. Do I think that was a one-off? Do I think he usually has the welfare of prisoners in his mind? I don't. Any more than I think the other custody officer regularly scrutinises in great depth why people have been arrested and whether they should be detained. Custody officers have to keep accurate custody records. Scarlett and Danica, 2 complainants in this case, were both strip searched and there is no note. Some custody records actually contain untruths. Maria's custody record was endorsed. Further arrests are required. You remember, Maria is the woman saying F to the police. Further arrests, I asked? No, there were none of those, Greater Manchester Police said. And there's another entry on her custody record too. An application for a 3-day remand was not granted. A 3-day remand, I said. No, that never occurred. Greater Manchester Police told me when they'd investigated this, but there they were. Entries on what is purporting to be a record of this woman's custody. So we asked that the Deputy Mayor has developed scrutiny panels to look at arrests and to look at custody decisions and to look at custody records every few months on a random basis, selecting the arrests themselves and looking at the bottom end of criminality where all of these people were brought into custody. In domestic abuse, which you've heard a little bit of now, clearly College of Policing guidance is not being followed. You're supposed to look, when you go to a domestic abuse situation and when you deal with it, and note who is really the perpetrator. And the College of Policing guidance says it's very well known that perpetrators make false allegations against their accuser to try to take back control. And it is the same with the manipulative sex offenders from whom some of these women have suffered. Where there are cross-examination allegations of domestic abuse, not here but nationwide, and men and officers go out to arrest, so where there are cross-allegations, she's called, he accuses when she arrives. Women are 3 times likelier to be arrested than men, though the majority of domestic abuse is, of course, by men on women. There's a case of a woman called Leah, who also shows that trauma, not being understood, contributes to this. She was put out of the house. It's not a serious event. They were going to de-arrest her, but she was talking about having left her property in the house, and 2 male officers got hold of her to try and get her to focus on what they were saying. But she relived earlier abuse by men in that grip, and as she got more and more panicky about being gripped by men, they got more and more sure that she was a wild, reckless person and gripped her ever tighter. They ended up on the floor at a point where one of them is almost on top of her, and she is clearly reliving something because she says, "Do it then, do it then, do it then," on the film. If only the 2 women officers who were present were the ones who laid hands on her, if laying hands on her was necessary. And why that isn't just a basic principle of everyday policing, I know not, but it is definitely a recommendation. This woman, Leah, was arrested for struggling with officers. She was actually struggling with PTSD. Complaints, where it should all be put right, but they tend to be defensive with a bit of a counter-attack in them. Though Sophie complained, and it was said, back to her complaint, that she was rude to the officer. This is the officer who offered her a caution, and she rejected it, which, if she'd accepted, would have put a complete end to her teaching career. She did say to the woman that she was ashamed that a woman had put another woman into this position, and that is the rudeness. But the problem seems to be, you suffer some bad behaviour by the police, you make a complaint, and their attitude, as shown through these cases, is to attack you again. So you get a little bit more bad service from the police. And I think that the Deputy Mayor should look at how more lay involvement can come at an early stage into police complaints, because the defensiveness is perfectly obvious. It's massively damaging to public confidence, and although the mayoralty gets some appeals, very few people complain because they don't believe in it, and very few people who get attacked when they do complain don't go on, and so the mayoralty cannot see entirely what is happening. These are horror stories, aren't they? Hugely damaging to public confidence, and the pain that they cause is very significant. There is no doubt in my mind that Greater Manchester Police have improved arrests. They have tripled domestic abuse arrests, and they should be proud of that. I did gently remind the Chief Constable that included in those domestic abuse arrests will be Sophie's and also Maria's, and so things have to be watched very much more closely. But that will that increase of arrests increased public confidence, but boy, that confidence is going to evaporate if this behaviour isn't changed. How do you know which kind of police officer you're going to get? If you ring, will you get an upright, sensible one, or someone who, when you expect him to come to your aid, will really be coming to arrest you because you said F on the phone? The culture in place in Greater Manchester Police is clearly problematic. The steps that I've advised, where Kate can scrutinise, will nibble at the edges of that problem. I think that this is a cultural problem that dates well back before this Chief Constable was in post, because it is only a few years since Greater Manchester Police were even failing to inquire into 80,000 cases a year, and that's been transformed. But I think that you don't manage to throw it all up in the air and bring it down the way that you want it to go. However, that culture is, I fear, a problem, and is, albeit this is a tiny sample, shining through all that I have seen in the few months that I've been involved in this. To get rid of that culture is going to require determined leadership. And now that I have done this report, I have to hand on that responsibility to the Chief Constable.
Good afternoon. I'm Stephen Watson, the Chief Constable for Greater Manchester. I thank the Mayor for commissioning this report and Dame Vera for her efforts in drawing together a number of critically important issues. I acknowledge the shock and concern that will have been generated by the media report which gave rise to this new commission, and indeed the report itself today published. I thank those who came forward to inform this review, and I acknowledge their courage in so doing. Whilst this report speaks to some deeply, deeply uncomfortable truths, it and others like it always provide valuable insights and form an important part of what it is to be an accountable leader and a public servant. The GMP that I lead is open to review and objective scrutiny, and is driven by a desire to get things right for the people whom we serve. I accept the recommendations in this report and commit to making lasting improvements. The vast majority of our custody staff are highly professional and committed, despite the pressures of working in such a challenging environment. Our ability, however, to gain and retain the very fullest public confidence in the decency of our custody arrangements is crucial. We look forward to working closely with the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor to become a genuine exemplar in this area, aided by the establishment of enduring, comprehensive and independent scrutiny arrangements. The majority of the cases highlighted in this report do speak to a period when GMP were in special measures. Our custody system was clearly under pressure and struggling to perform to anything approaching an acceptable standard. It evidences poor systems, structures and processes, compounded by a lack of routine leadership scrutiny, with clear individual examples of incivility, insensitivity, and being quite uncaring in the face of vulnerability. These issues are of the utmost importance, given the fact that vulnerable people can easily be rendered more vulnerable where we do not maintain the highest of professional standards. Such standards must, of course, reflect our duty and our moral obligation, always to respect and uphold the dignity of all detainees, but with a specific focus on women and girls whose particular confidence the force must be anxious to secure. to those given voice by this inquiry and who have not received the care and the consideration to which they are entitled, I am sorry. In September 2022, His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and the Care Quality Commission conducted a joint comprehensive custody inspection of GMP. This inspection largely coincided with a period also under scrutiny by Dame Vera's inquiry. Their report, subsequently made publicly available, was similarly highly critical of that which they discovered. The themes highlighted very substantially mirror those which feature in Dame Vera's report. Immediately following the HMIC CQC inspection, GMP gave very powerful effect to a comprehensive £3.1 million action plan designed to address those shortcomings legitimately exposed. It included new, capable senior leadership, a 62% uplift in staffing, accounting for over 140 additional personnel, an investment in technology and training. A further £7.4 million is currently being expended in refurbishing and expanding our custody estate. Our custody staff have worked hard and have embraced the need for change. And in revisiting GMP in December last year, HMIC reported very positively on progress to the extent that all of the highlighted causes of concern were downgraded to areas for improvement. The work to address the majority of those areas for improvement is now assessed as complete, and with those remaining elements of the programme being at an advanced stage of implementation. Whilst much very clearly still needs to be done, and elements of Dame Vera's report are distinct from those highlighted by HMIC, it is the case that our ability to take forward the recommendations today is immensely strengthened by the substantial progress made thus far. A number of additional practical and beneficial steps have already been taken. For example, GMP no longer uses and issues anti-tear clothing. Every female detainee has appointed to her a dedicated female welfare officer. Bespoke sealed packs, which contain feminine sanitary products, are proactively issued to all female detainees. Strip searches are more transparently recorded, tightly governed, and scrutinised. And a centralised standards and compliance team now examine between 150 and 200 random examples of detentions every month to ensure adherence to the highest standards. Insofar as our response to Dame Vera's findings and recommendations as a whole, we have today published on the Force website a comprehensive response to each of those recommendations. Notwithstanding the significance of this report's devastating findings, it is legitimate in this circumstance to describe an important element of context in GMP's contemporary journey. Just 3 years ago, as has been acknowledged, the Force was formally adjudged to be failing. GMP were then failing even to record a quarter of all crimes reported to the Force, let alone investigate them. The imperative to properly record crime and to investigate all reasonable lines of inquiry inevitably and rightly led to the rapid growth in the number of arrests seen across Greater Manchester. This in turn created great pressure across a variety of functions: custody, forensics, and criminal justice, to name but a few. It has been this dynamic which partly speaks to some of the weaknesses exposed and has driven a well-established force recovery plan which has already resulted in myriad improvements across all facets of GMP's performance. GMP's improvements have factually outstripped that being achieved anywhere else in the country for 2 consecutive years. With a single exception, the force is now rated as adequate or good in all things. A genuinely unprecedented turnaround. Whilst arrests have more than doubled, they are not, nor have they ever been, considered an end in themselves. Arrests are merely part of the process in obtaining better outcomes for victims of crime. Our having increased the arrest of domestic abusers by 150%, for example, has led to more offenders being brought to justice, increased confidence to report these types of offences to the police, and during the last 12 months, a 13.7% reduction in offences being committed. This, in turn, has led to our now sustaining a 26% reduction in homicides, which stand at the lowest level in over a decade. In short, whilst GMP has doubled its arrests, it has commensurately and significantly increased the numbers of positive outcomes for crime and demonstrates why GMP is the only force in England and Wales to have been adjudged by HMIC to have improved our investigative standards over the past 2 years. This focus on improved investigations and the strides, both complete and well underway, to improve our complaints handling system, something of the highest priority, will complement all that is being done to improve our custody function in line with Dame Vera's recommendations. I do know that some of the questions this inquiry set out to answer have not yet been answered, and some of these relate to allegations which have caused understandable disquiet. These matters are still subject to continuing independent investigation, and GMP will continue to provide the very fullest assistance to those charged with discovering the truth. But let me be very clear. I take all cases where criminal conduct is alleged extremely serious. Any instances of criminal wrongdoing in GMP will be relentlessly pursued, and my track record in exiting people unfit to wear the uniform speaks for itself. I will conclude by repeating our fulsome acceptance of Dame Vera's recommendations and to implementing them fully and faithfully. Some of the recommendations relate to other parties, the Home Office, the Mayor's Office, the National Police Chiefs Council and the College of Policing. We will work with others to ensure that all of the wider recommendations are fully considered, and wherever possible, we will seek out opportunities for GMP to play a leading role in their practical implementation. Thank you. I now hand over to the Deputy Mayor.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Kate Green, the Deputy Mayor, and on a day-to-day basis, the Mayor delegates his responsibilities as Police and Crime Commissioner for Greater Manchester to me to carry out on his behalf. May I start by echoing the tributes paid to the complainants who courageously shared their experiences with Dame Vera for this report. Their accounts of what happened actions necessary to respond to her recommendations. As you've also heard, some of the recommendations in today's report echo the findings of the very critical report received early last year from His Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, which dealt with custody arrangements in Greater Manchester Police. And again, I've already put in place arrangements to support the Chief Constable in ensuring that the contents of the Inspectorate's report are being actioned, and I'm pleased that HMIC have acknowledged that good progress is being made. But having now received Dame Vera's final report, which adds to and amplifies the Inspectorate's findings, I'm announcing today that I will be setting up a new oversight group which I will chair. This group, which will report to the Mayor, will monitor GMP's progress in implementing all of Dame Vera's recommendations, and its first task will be to ensure that a detailed timetable and milestones for the delivery of her recommendations is put in place. The group will also provide continued and strengthened oversight of the implementation of the recommendations in HMIC-FRS's report. Dame Vera also makes some specific recommendations directly for me as Deputy Mayor. I very much welcome her recommendation that I establish a scrutiny panel to carry out dip sampling of arrests, and I will extend the role of that panel to cover custody sergeants' decisions, custody records and strip search records. Like Dame Vera, I highly value the contribution of our independent custody visitors, and I will take forward her recommendation to strengthen the scrutiny that they provide through the development of an expanded role within my directorate in the Combined Authority to provide the professional oversight that she proposes. Nearly all of those featured in this report made complaints. It is deeply concerning to read of the failures by GMP to deal with them in full and at the first opportunity. GMP have now, as you've heard, significantly increased their capacity to respond to complaints and are moving to a centralised process to ensure consistency and improve quality. Nonetheless, the system still too often fails to respond adequately and appropriately to concerns and complaints. I have strengthened my office's scrutiny of police complaints handling and will evaluate progress and the impact of changes being introduced by GMP to inform my decision on the need for and shape of further reform. The Chief Constable this afternoon has made very clear that any wrongdoing by officers in Greater Manchester Police will be rigorously investigated and all necessary action taken. Today's report and the 14 cases it describes have shone a bright spotlight on appalling practice in Greater Manchester Police, highlighting serious concerns and failings. The public must be able to have confidence that anyone who is arrested, taken into custody or searched by GMP will be treated lawfully, with care and dignity. I am very sorry that this report has shown that that has not always been the case. That cannot and will not be allowed to continue. The Mayor and I are very grateful to the complainants and to Dame Vera, and we wholeheartedly commit to ensuring that each of her recommendations is followed through, that the lessons from this vitally important report are learned, and the public, and particularly women and girls in Greater Manchester Police, will have the police service that they expect and are entitled to. We now have time for media colleagues to conduct one-to-one interviews with Dame Vera, the Chief Constable and the Mayor, and I believe colleagues from our media team in the Combined Authority are going to facilitate that process.